How many of you have suffered from the frustration of a customer service call only to hang up because you were frustrated that you couldn't communicate with the person on the other line?
I bet that all of you have, and if so, you have seen the complexity of language barriers in the workplace.
As young professionals who will either be employed or perhaps some of us will even be employers, it's extremely important for us to understand all angles of this issue and the solutions to it.
Let's look at this problem in more detail.
Employers look at language barriers as hindrances rather than working with people who speak other languages to help and benefit them in their working life.
And with diversity in the workplace in this day and age, refusing to address language barriers is difficult and be detrimental to the company.
In addition, the development of cliques among employees with language barriers creates a rift. And some people tend to think the best way to deal with language barriers is by not dealing with them at all.
One of the biggest challenges, however, is addressing language barriers while remaining politically correct and respecting other cultural beliefs. These are some ways that cultural awareness can be promoted in the workplace. Something as simple as open communication with employees goes a long way. In her 2015 article for Bentley College, 7 Ways to Promote Diversity in the Workplace, Kristen Walsh states celebrating diversity can help increase awareness and acceptance. Things like potlucks or dinners can bring everyone together. A lot of misunderstandings come from assuming when we don't understand a different language or we interpret a gesture as if it has universal meaning, well, that's a recipe for disaster. It is very important that we use short sentences, stick to the point, avoid humor. What may seem funny to you may not be funny to that other person. Being respectful goes a long way.
In enlisting in interpreters, this will improve communication internally and externally by being able to communicate with people that speak other languages. Sources was Valerie Fox in the Houston Chronicle. This will also eliminate bias and can improve business sales and can be effective because you can promote the business. You can expand your company and add diversity within the organization. It will promote company growth because you can market to different demographics.
Using repetition and visuals to aid the employees while training them will give them a better understanding of what they need to do. And by visualizing, they will comprehend the task at hand without confusion. Training in both languages will also help employees to understand what task they're supposed to be doing. In his 2017 article, 3 Ways Training Languages Benefits Your Business, Brian McMunn states that workers who received language training oftentimes become more confident and perform a lot better. And having employees who are bilingual maximizes the amount of customers your business can obtain. Also, making sure that your customers understand what they're doing and checking on them will not only build trust, but it'll unload a lot of stress in your working life as well as in the workplace. Today we've seen how this widespread and common issue doesn't have to be so hard to address.
If you openly discuss cultural differences, using interpreters will provide employee training. You can make a tremendous difference in overcoming this problem.
Folks, imagine this for a minute. What would your life look like without language barriers? The way that you communicated with your employees, if you're an employer. If you're an employee yourself, your relationship with your employer. These things can all be so beneficial to you if you don't have to overcome these language barriers. So it's important that way.
So learn these things, take them to heart, put them in action, and change the working world forever.
Give me a second just to record a couple quick minutes. Let's give this team a bigger applause. Thank you. I have a couple questions for you. In preparing for the speech and really digging into the topic that you're dealing with, what were some of the specific language barriers that you talked about as examples of instances where you did hang up the phone on someone because of a language barrier? Can we go from more broad to specific in demonstrating what you mean by language barriers?
Okay,
Gotcha.
one is everybody owns a credit card. And when you call the credit card company for whatever reason, a specific reason, you get someone that does not speak fluent English on the other line. And so they can't understand you, and you can't understand them. So one reason was to train your employees to speak English. Therefore, we can understand and communicate better. So there I can get the service I need and understand what's going on with my credit card bill.
Okay. So before we get into talking about your solution, I wanted to explore the idea of language barriers. So is Johnny faithfully speaking for the group when your focus is on people speaking a different language?
Yes.
Okay. So when we think about language barriers, we can think about a variety of things beyond that, like bypassing malapropisms. We can think about disconfirming language. We can think about equivocality with language. And I'm curious if those topics were things that you considered in exploring this topic and in developing your message.
Those things were things that we looked at. I think what we felt like was most relevant is something that everybody could relate to is what Johnny used as her example. Different languages, interacting with somebody that speaks an entirely different language, obviously that's what was talked about with enlisting interpreters. But I think the biggest thing is perhaps somebody that, and one of our strongest focuses in this speech and our research was two people that speak the same language, but their regional dialects may be different. And that creates, although they both are considered, let's say, Spanish speaking or English speaking, creates a barrier there, and they don't adequately understand who they're speaking to on the other end and their way of using that language.
We also explored how there was in the beginning intro slide there was a graph showing the workers and their different ethnicities in the United States, and it was sort of we also explored that it's really difficult and almost impossible not to hire people of other cultures and other ethnicities and diversities. So.
Okay, all right. Let me see. As we look into the body of your speech, it seems that you're focusing on three possible solutions to deal with the issue of people in the workforce not speaking the language of their customers. That really seems to be what you're focusing on here. Can you briefly review what those solutions are one more time?
Enlisting and interpreters and training your employees. So just to elaborate a little bit on that.
Well, no, please don't elaborate. There are three solutions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So hiring interpreters, training employees, what's the third?
Openly discussing cultural diversity.
Okay, all right, okay. Is there one solution that, as a group, you've identified as the best, as significantly better than the other two?
I think our strongest one would definitely be the comprehensive employee training with an emphasis on that. There's a lot of employee training that goes on, but it's not necessarily adequate, and oftentimes it's geared towards getting that person into the job when you look into it in a short time frame. And so what we're wanting to focus on and what we thought the strongest solution to this problem was, and what we're encouraging you as an audience to implement in your company or whoever you're working for one day, is to make sure that's happening if you're in a position to do so, because that is what has the strongest impact on overcoming these language barriers from what we found.
Okay. One final question about training. What have you found to be the best way to train people to speak a language fluently, to change the way they speak the language? I might already be an English speaker, but I might not talk too good. And as an employer, What are you going to do to goodify my speeching? How does that work? How do you train someone to change the way they talk?
Daryl, you want to talk about that a little bit?
I mean, a lot of the times when we were searching for sources and articles, that especially with the ones about training, it would talk a lot about using plain language.
Okay.
Not so much as like words that are harder to comprehend or like big specific like phrases. It taught to like not only use smaller, easier sort of to like say phrases, but also like visuals in order to train, because a lot of people can comprehend. They may not understand what you're saying, but if you give it to them in a picture, they'll be able to comprehend it a lot better.
Okay.
Another thing is,
There's a limitation to that, rather though, if we're training people to do customer service over the phone, which is primarily audio.
For sure.
It's hard to rely on nonverbal behavior when you're dealing with someone who's providing customer
Only
service
verbally?
over the phone.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Zach, what were you
so
gonna say?
another thing I was going to say is a lot of people, like you're saying, from certain regions, let's say for instance Kentucky, right, in the mountains
Watch
talk.
it, son.
So let's say they don't necessarily realize they have a certain way of speaking until they go somewhere else. You hear people, especially in country music, say, didn't realize how different I was until I got into the big city, right? And I think one of the biggest steps in that training is not necessarily telling them that they have a problem, certainly not that, but identifying that they do have a regional dialect. That's okay, but let's make sure that we get it to the point that it can be easily understood universally.
Okay. Well, yes, ideally that is what we want. But let me get into my corrective comments here. I think the first most important thing we need to think about is how that happens. Is it language immersion? Is it applying a certain method of providing feedback and correction? Is it, so much of telephone customer service is recorded for training purposes. How many of you have heard that when you call customer support? This call may be monitored for training purposes. Well, how are employers sitting down with employees and breaking down their language? Is it enough to point out, well, you're confusing good and well, you're getting your adjective and adverb confused? Is it sufficient to point out instances where people are mispronouncing words? I think my first corrective comment is we need to dig into this question of how language training works. And if that's going to be the main solution that you're advocating, for us to feel confident in implementing such a solution in our own businesses, we need to know what that looks like. Yeah, John?
Okay, so you would have training booklets. People would be trained to teach. So your employers are sent to a training conference. When they come back, or even just regular training at a whatever location, but when they come back, they're able to Skype, do the video conferences, with people that are in other regions to train. They will have booklets that they will follow, almost like class training, classroom. And
have you identified any products that are especially useful for training people with language? Have you identified booklets that a company might invest in to use for this issue?
Rosetta Stone was a big one. That's sort of like the typical one, but that was one that, especially where I've worked, they've used a lot. Because we do actually, at the last store I worked at, we had an employee who would train, because he spoke fluent Spanish and English, and he would train some of the English-speaking employees to also speak Spanish. So when he wasn't there, they could at least have the basic Spanish down to communicate with customers.
Okay.
So, and he referenced those a lot.
Okay.
does that answer
All
your
right.
question?
Pardon me?
Does that answer your question?
It's
How we would do it?
It's heading in the direction. It's heading in the direction.
So with the video
One of the
conferencing
things-
and training.
One of the things that that would be one of my concerns about that is Rosetta Stone seems to be directed for teaching people a new language, not so much teaching people to improve the language they already speak. I'm not sure how effective Rosetta Stone would be giving it to someone from Kentucky and helping someone eliminate one's accent that makes one difficult to understand. So I appreciate your thinking on the spot and thinking of ways of addressing my concerns, addressing my questions. Let's move into getting into my feedback. All right, really promising topic. The focus on language barriers as something that we as professionals need to act upon to be professionals ourselves. This shows a great focus on business and professional communication skills, building a topic that's appropriate for this setting. I saw really good effort at teamwork as far as sharing the speech and sharing speaking responsibilities. Nice willingness by teammates to hand off parts of the message within each main idea to classmates. Thought the visual aids did a nice job of adding emphasis to specific parts of your message. I got a consistent effort to draw attention to sources within the body of the speech. Strong introduction. Nice job of particularly in terms of handing off speaking responsibilities, working with you, capturing the audience's attention, making appeal for all of us to care about this issue at hand, and pointing us in the direction of where the speech is going. Similarly, the clear call for action is part of the conclusion of the speech. Let me move into my corrective comments. And in offering these corrective comments, you might take just sort of reflect in your own mind about the types of questions I was asking you in response to your message. Some of these questions that I asked up front, they were dealing with weaknesses of the speech where I think a different kind of effort might have been called for. So the first thing I want you to bear in mind about persuasion is that we want to limit the audience's options. We want to eliminate the possibility of the audience doing lots of different things. Focus your attention on one specific thing. There really shouldn't be 3 solutions you're talking about. There should be one solution you're talking about. Responsible employees should put rigorous training in place using materials like Rosetta Stone to get outsource employees and employees from overseas to speak English like Americans. It's fine for you to mention other solutions as long as you're refuting those other solutions and showing how the one solution you're advocating is the best. The way persuasion works is that if we get the audience, if you're going to have any effect on the audience, it's going to get us to do a specific thing. You're not going to get us to do 3 things. It's like going into Best Buy. At best, or cons, at best you're going to get someone to buy one television. You're not going to get them to buy a Sony, a Sanyo, and a Mitsubishi. Get them to buy the one best thing. It's fine for you to mention that, yeah, there are other things for sale. We can talk about getting communities together within the workplace and celebrating diversity within these communities. But there are weaknesses to that approach that are dealt with by the one approach that you're advocating. All right, so that's my first major corrective comment. We need to distill this message down to one specific thing.
I think that the problem was like the way the rubric was,
Yeah,
and
it's
it
a
had us do like get 20
solutions.
solutions and then narrow it down to 3. I think we were confused about like us not focusing on just one, and we were focusing on those 3 that we chose. So.
Review what Chapter 9 deals with as far as brainstorming and narrowing the focus for a speech. Brainstorming aims to point us in a direction where we think of a novel idea. Once we get to that novel idea, we want to focus on it. We don't want to be precious, cling to other ideas that we assume are good just because we have them.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that activity, I wanted folks to go broad and consider a lot of different options. But if you look at the directions for that task, it does have you distill your effort to one best solution to deal with the one most interesting, wicked problem you're tackling. Okay. And yeah. So let's see. another note about persuasion. One of the things that I asked you about was specifically what you meant by language barriers, because that can mean disconfirming language. It can mean racist, biased language, ageist language, ableist language, heteronormative language. It can deal with the mechanics of language like malapropisms and equivocality. We could be just talking about pronouncing things correctly. A lot of things fold into this idea of language barriers. And so one of my first questions was to ask you to be more specific. That might have been dealt with in the first main idea, where we actually talk about what language barriers you're interested in. There was an interesting thing that was mentioned about how cliques of people form within the workplace and how language barriers exist within these cliques. Tell us what that sounds like. Act it out for us. Or show us quotes on the screen of specific examples of the problem you're talking about to improve the clarity of your message. All right, so let's see. There's the specificity of what you're advocating, clarity of the problem you're dealing with. One final corrective comment. The speech weighed in shorter than what I was looking for. It's about 3.5 minutes before you hit the 8-minute mark. So we've got to ask our question, where does there need to be more with this message? Specificity of the object of inquiry, the language barriers. That's one way the speech can be built out further. Refuting the other two solutions in favor of language training. Show us why, holding hands and being politically correct and singing Kumbaya. Show us with unwavering certainty why solution 2 and solution 1 are not as good as solution 3. But then there needs to be more developed for that visualization section. So using the motivated sequence, what you want to do is focus your attention on us, Avery, on Brazos, on Marilyn, on me, and Jocelyn. How are our lives better by dealing with this process? That if Marilyn imagines herself as a manager someday, how is her job as a manager going to be easier? How is she going to be more effective? How is she going to be more empowered by implementing this change that you're advocating now? And I would put more focus on the benefits to this group of people in developing that visualization section. Okay. Take these corrective comments as direction for the next time you're called upon to persuade someone. Anything. Specificity. Narrow focus. Focus on the benefits to the person you're selling something to. And you do really well with persuasion, taking that lesson from this experience. Let's give this team a big round of applause. Thank you.